Sarah Mitchell thought she was living the perfect American dream in suburban Denver, Colorado. Married to Michael, a successful financial advisor, she believed their love story was unshakable. But when their first child, Emma, is born with mysterious trembling that doctors can't initially explain, a routine blood test uncovers a devastating family secret that Michael has been hiding for years. What Sarah discovers will not only challenge everything she thought she knew about her husband, but will force her to make impossible choices about her daughter's future and her own survival. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones harboring the darkest secrets. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I never thought that the happiest day of my life would become the beginning of my worst nightmare. The Colorado morning sun was streaming through the hospital windows when I first held my daughter Emma in my arms. After 18 hours of labor, she was finally here, all 7 pounds, 3 ounces of her. But something was wrong. I noticed it immediately, even through the exhaustion and overwhelming joy of new motherhood. Emma was trembling. Not the normal, newborn jitters that every parenting book talks about, but a persistent, rhythmic shaking that made my heart race with worry. Her tiny hands would clench and unclench, and her whole body seemed to vibrate with an energy that didn't feel right. "Michael, look at her hands," I whispered to my husband, who was standing beside my hospital bed with tears of joy still streaming down his face. He had that proud new father glow, his usually perfectly styled brown hair disheveled from running his hands through it all night. Michael leaned in closer, his blue eyes focusing on our daughter. For just a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Not concern, but recognition. It was so brief I almost missed it, but there was definitely something there. "She's probably just cold," he said quickly, reaching over to adjust the pink blanket around Emma. "Newborns have trouble regulating their temperature, remember? Dr. Chen mentioned that during the birthing classes. But I knew my husband, and I could hear the slight tremor in his voice that he got when he was nervous about something at work. The same tone he used when a client was asking too many questions about their portfolio. "I'm going to call the nurse," I said, reaching for the call button. "Sarah, honey, you're overreacting," Michael said, his hand gently catching my wrist. "She's perfect. Look at her. She's beautiful, healthy, everything we wanted." I studied his face, searching for the confidence I needed to feel. Michael had always been my rock. We'd met 5 years ago at a coffee shop in downtown Denver, where I was working as a marketing coordinator for a small tech startup. He was wearing an expensive suit and typing furiously on his laptop, and when he looked up and smiled at me, I felt like the luckiest woman alive. Our courtship had been straight out of a romantic movie. Dinner dates at the best restaurants in the city, weekend trips to Aspen, surprise flowers delivered to my office. He proposed on top of Mount Evans with a ring that cost more than I made in 6 months. Everyone said we were perfect together, the successful financial advisor and his devoted wife. But right now, watching Emma continue to shake in my arms, I felt anything but perfect. The nurse, Janet, came in with her usual bright smile. She was probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and the sort of competent energy that made you trust her immediately. "How are we doing, Mama?" she asked, approaching the bed. "Emma's been trembling since she was born," I said, carefully transferring our daughter to Janet's experienced hands. "Is this normal?" Janet's expression grew more serious as she examined Emma, gently extending her tiny limbs and watching the tremors. "Has anyone in either of your families had any neurological conditions? Epilepsy, seizure disorders, anything like that?" The question hung in the air like a lead weight. I looked at Michael, expecting him to answer since he knew both our family histories well. We'd gone through all of this during my pregnancy, discussing genetic risks and family medical histories with our obstetrician. "No," Michael said firmly. "Nothing like that on either side." But I noticed he wouldn't meet my eyes when he said it. "I'm going to have Dr. Rodriguez take a look," Janet said, wrapping Emma back up. "He's our pediatric neurologist, just to be safe." After she left, the room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Michael was staring out the window at the Denver skyline. His jaw clenched in that way it got when he was stressed about work. "Michael," I said quietly, "is there anything you haven't told me about your family's medical history?" He turned back to me, and for a split second, I saw something in his eyes that I'd never seen before. Fear. Not the normal new parent anxiety, but genuine, deep fear. "Of course not," he said, coming over to kiss my forehead. "I would never hide anything like that from you. You know that." But as he held me, I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the hospital's air conditioning. Something was wrong, and it was more than just Emma's trembling. Dr. Rodriguez arrived an hour later, a tall man with graying temples and gentle hands. He examined Emma thoroughly, testing her reflexes and watching her movements with the careful attention of someone who had seen this before. "I'd like to run some blood tests," he said finally. "We need to check for a few genetic conditions that can cause these symptoms." "What kind of genetic conditions?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "There are several possibilities. Some are manageable with medication, others—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Others require more intensive treatment. The blood work will tell us what we're dealing with." Michael stepped forward, and I noticed his hands were shaking almost as much as Emma's. "How long until we get the results?" 24 to 48 hours for the preliminary results, Doctor," Rodriguez said. "I know it's hard to wait, but try to stay positive. Many of these conditions are very treatable when caught early." After he left with the blood samples, I found myself staring at my husband in a whole new way. The man I'd thought I knew completely suddenly felt like a stranger. And you know what? If you were in my position, seeing your newborn baby trembling and your husband acting strange, what would you think? Would you trust your instincts, or would you try to convince yourself everything was fine? If you're enjoying this story and want to see how this mystery unfolds, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next chapters. Because what I discovered in those blood test results would change everything I thought I knew about the man I married. The next 24 hours felt like the longest of my entire life. Emma's trembling hadn't gotten worse, but it hadn't gotten better either. She was nursing well and seemed alert. But every time I looked at those tiny, shaking hands, my heart clenched with worry. Michael had barely slept, pacing the hospital room like a caged animal whenever he thought I wasn't watching. I'd tried, calling my mother-in-law Patricia to let her know about Emma's condition, but Michael quickly took the phone from me. "Let me handle my mother," he said, stepping out into the hallway. Through the glass door, I could see him having what looked like an intense conversation, his free hand gesturing emphatically. When he came back, his face was pale. "What did she say?" I asked. "She's worried, obviously, but she agrees we should wait for the test results before we panic anyone else." Something about his answer felt rehearsed, like he'd been practicing what to tell me. In 5 years of marriage, I'd learned to read Michael's tells, and right now, every single one of them was screaming that he was lying. Dr. Rodriguez appeared in our doorway at exactly 2:17 p.m. on Tuesday. I know the exact time because I'd been watching the clock obsessively, and when I saw his serious expression, I felt my world start to shift. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, could we speak privately?" he asked. Michael immediately stood up. "Is it serious?" "Please, let's sit down," Dr. Rodriguez said, pulling up a chair beside my bed. He had a folder in his hands, and I noticed he was gripping it tightly. "The blood work has come back, and we have some answers about Emma's condition." He opened the folder and pulled out several pages covered in medical terminology I couldn't understand. "Emma has a genetic condition called essential tremor syndrome. It's a neurological disorder that causes the involuntary shaking you've been observing." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. Is it serious?" "It's manageable," Dr. Rodriguez said quickly. "With proper medication and therapy, children with this condition can live completely normal lives. But here's the thing. Essential tremor syndrome is inherited. It's an autosomal dominant genetic condition, which means that one parent must carry the gene for a child to develop it." Michael went completely still beside me. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. "So one of us has this condition?" I asked. Dr. Rodriguez looked directly at Michael. "Actually, Mr. Mitchell, the genetic markers suggest that you're the carrier. Have you ever experienced any trembling or shaking, particularly when you're stressed or tired?" The silence that followed was deafening. I turned to look at my husband, and I watched the color drain from his face as if someone had opened a valve. Michael started, then stopped. His hands, which had been clasped in his lap, started to visibly shake. Michael? I whispered. I've had minor tremors since I was a teenager, he said finally, his voice barely audible. But they were so mild, I never thought. I stared at him in disbelief. You've had tremors for over 15 years and you never told me? They were barely noticeable, Michael said, his voice rising defensively. Just when I was nervous or had too much caffeine. I managed them, I dealt with it. I didn't think it was something that would affect our children. Dr. Rodriguez cleared his throat diplomatically. Mr. Mitchell, did your family ever discuss any neurological conditions? Essential tremor often runs in families, and while the symptoms can be mild in some family members, they tend to be more pronounced in others. Michael's hands were shaking so badly now that he had to clasp them together. My grandmother, he whispered. My father's mother. She had terrible shaking. But my dad always said it was just old age, just nerves. I felt like I was watching a stranger. The man I'd married, the man I'd planned my entire future with, had been hiding a genetic condition that he'd now passed to our daughter. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, and I could hear my voice cracking with emotion. Michael, we talked about family medical history. We went through everything with Dr. Chen during my pregnancy. You looked me in the eye and said there was nothing. I didn't think it was relevant, he said, but he still couldn't look at me. My symptoms were so mild, I honestly forgot about them most of the time. And my grandmother, she was in her 80s when her shaking got bad. I thought maybe it was just age. Dr. Rodriguez seemed to sense the tension building between us. The important thing now is that we know what we're dealing with. Essential tremor syndrome is very treatable, especially when we catch it this early. Emma can start on a low-dose medication that will significantly reduce her symptoms. What about long-term effects? I asked, trying to focus on what mattered most. With proper treatment, most children with essential tremor go on to live completely normal lives. They can participate in sports, pursue any career they want, have families of their own. The medication is very effective, and the condition often stabilizes in adulthood. After Dr. Rodriguez left, Michael and I sat in complete silence for what felt like hours. Emma was sleeping peacefully in her bassinet, but I could see the subtle tremors even in her sleep. Sarah, Michael finally said, reaching for my hand. I pulled away. Don't. Please let me explain. Explain what, Michael? How you lied to me? How you hid a genetic condition that you've now passed to our daughter? How you sat there during every single doctor's appointment and said there was nothing in your family history. Tears were streaming down my face now, and I felt angry and betrayed in a way I'd never experienced before. I was scared, he said quietly. I was scared you wouldn't want to have children with me if you knew. I was scared you'd think I was damaged or broken. So instead, you decided to lie and let me find out after our daughter was born with the condition? Michael stood up abruptly, running his hands through his hair. You don't understand the pressure I was under. My whole family has been hiding this for generations. My dad made me promise never to tell anyone because it could affect my career, my insurance, everything. Your career? I said incredulously. You were more worried about your job than about our child's health? That's not what I meant. Then what did you mean, Michael? Because right now I'm looking at a man I don't recognize. As I watched him pace around the small hospital room, his hands visibly shaking with stress, I realized that everything I thought I knew about my marriage was built on a lie. And here's what I want to know from you. If someone you loved and trusted had hidden something this important from you, something that affected your child, could you ever forgive them? How do you rebuild trust when the foundation was cracked from the beginning? Make sure you're subscribed to see how this story continues, because you won't believe what other secrets I uncovered about Michael's family. Because the essential tremor was just the beginning of what he'd been hiding from me. 3 days later, I was back home in our suburban Denver house, but nothing felt the same. Emma was doing well on her medication. The trembling had reduced significantly, and Dr. Rodriguez assured us that she would develop normally with proper treatment. But every time I looked at my husband, I felt like I was living with a stranger. Michael had been trying to make amends constantly. He brought me coffee in bed, handled all of Emma's night feedings, and even took a week off work to help with the transition home. But his attempts at normalcy only made the betrayal feel worse. I was sitting in Emma's nursery, watching her sleep peacefully in her crib, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Patricia Mitchell, my mother-in-law. Hello, Patricia, I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. Sarah, dear, how is little Emma doing? Patricia's voice sounded strained, different from her usual composed tone. She's doing better. The medication is helping with the tremors. There was a long pause, and then Patricia said something that made my blood run cold. Sarah, I need to tell you something about Michael's family history, something he should have told you years ago. I sat up straighter in the rocking chair. What do you mean? It's not just the essential tremor, Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael's grandmother, Helen, didn't just have shaking hands. She had early-onset dementia, severe anxiety, and the tremors were so bad by the time she was 60 that she couldn't function. She spent the last 10 years of her life in a care facility. My heart started racing. Patricia, what are you telling me? The essential tremor in our family isn't mild, Sarah. It gets progressively worse with age, and it's often accompanied by other neurological issues. Michael's father, Robert, started showing symptoms when he was 55. That's why he retired early from his law practice. His hands shook so badly he couldn't write. I felt sick. Does Michael know all of this? Of course he knows, Patricia said, and I could hear her crying softly. We all know. Robert made the whole family promise to never discuss it with outsiders because he was afraid it would affect Michael's career in finance. Can you imagine if his clients knew he had a genetic condition that affects motor control? I was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Patricia, why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know the truth. And because Emma deserves to know what she might be facing as she gets older. The medication helps in childhood, but the long-term prognosis... Sarah, there's no cure. It only gets worse. After I hung up, I sat in Emma's nursery feeling like my entire world had collapsed. Not only had Michael lied about having the condition, but he'd hidden the fact that it was progressive and often came with other serious neurological complications. When Michael came home from picking up groceries, I was waiting for him in the living room with a folder full of research I'd been doing online about essential tremor syndrome. We need to talk, I said. Michael took one look at my face and set the grocery bags down slowly. Sarah, what's wrong? Is Emma okay? Your mother called me today. The color drained from his face. What did she say? She told me the truth, Michael. The whole truth about your grandmother, about your father, about what this condition really means for Emma's future. Michael sank into the chair across from me, his head in his hands. Sarah, I can explain. Can you? Because I've spent the last 3 hours reading medical journals and case studies. Do you know what I found out about essential tremor syndrome? I opened the folder and read directly from the printouts. Progressive worsening of symptoms with age. High correlation with anxiety disorders and depression. Increased risk of early cognitive decline. Some patients become completely disabled by their 60s. It doesn't happen to everyone, Michael said desperately. Some people have mild symptoms their whole lives. But you don't know which category Emma will fall into, do you? And you knew all of this when we decided to have children. Michael looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I love you, Sarah. I love Emma. I would never do anything to hurt either of you intentionally. But you did hurt us, I said, my voice breaking. You took away my right to make an informed decision about our family's future. You took away Emma's right to know her medical history from birth. I was scared, he said again. My dad drilled it into me from the time I was young. Never tell anyone about the family condition. It could ruin everything I'd worked for. I stood up, pacing to the window that looked out over our perfectly manicured front yard. Everything about our life looked normal from the outside, but I felt like I was living in a house of cards that had just collapsed. Michael, I need you to be completely honest with me right now. Are there any other medical conditions in your family that you haven't told me about? Any other secrets? He was quiet for so long that I turned around to look at him. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. My Uncle David, my father's brother, he had Huntington's disease. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Huntington's disease, a degenerative brain disorder that was also genetic, also progressive, and much more severe than essential tremor. Michael, I whispered, tell me Emma can't inherit that too. The chances are very small, he said quickly. David was adopted. We found that out later. It's not actually blood-related. But you didn't know that when we got pregnant, did you? His silence was answer enough. I walked over to Emma's bassinet, where she was sleeping peacefully, unaware that her parents' marriage was falling apart around her. Looking at her perfect little face, I realized that everything had changed. I need time to think, I said finally. I need space to figure out what this means for us. Sarah, please don't do anything drastic. We can work through this. We can see a counselor. We can figure out how to manage Emma's condition together. I turned back to face him, and I saw a man who looked broken and desperate. Part of me still loved him, the Michael I thought I'd married. But I wasn't sure I could ever trust him again. I'm taking Emma to stay with my sister in Fort Collins for a few days, I said. I need to think about whether we have a marriage worth saving. Sarah, please. I know I made mistakes, but I love you. I love our family. Love isn't enough, Michael. Marriage is supposed to be built on honesty and trust, and I don't know if we have either of those things anymore. As I packed Emma's diaper bag, I found myself wondering if I could ever look at Michael the same way again. The man I'd married had hidden not just one genetic condition, but a family history of serious neurological problems that could affect our daughter for the rest of her life. And now I had to decide, was this something we could overcome, or was it a betrayal too deep to forgive? What would you do in my situation? Could you forgive someone who hid something this important from you, even if they did it out of fear? How do you rebuild a marriage when the foundation was built on lies? If this story has resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Because sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who hold the deepest secrets. And sometimes discovering those secrets forces us to choose between love and self-preservation. The question I'm still asking myself is, which choice is right for Emma's future?